Hello everyone, my name is Brian P. Easton, and I am the author of a book series called Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter. Come on in, belly up to the werewolf bar. Welcome back to Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter for your August 2025 edition of the show. It doesn't seem possible. We started doing this back in 2019, and I'll admit it took us a while to find our stride. But tonight puts us right about 2/3 of the way through our 7th season. And with summer coming to an end in just a little over a month, we can almost see the 8th season from here. But before I get too far ahead of myself, allow me to present our creature of the night, which is what we call the whiskey that we pair with the werewolf hunter month to month. Now tonight we're featuring Redemption Rye. Now if you've read the books, you'll know that rye whiskey is near and dear to the heart of Sylvester James, the hero, or probably better to say the anti-hero of the series. But you know, prior to the 1920s, rye whiskey was near and dear to the heart of America because most of what was being poured across the nation was rye. Prohibition came along and changed all that, of course. And when the Volstead Act was finally repealed in '33 by the 21st Amendment, distillers, they took a different direction. Redemption claims to bring rye back. And if they are, they're certainly not alone. Liquor stores are flush to the gills these days with rye whiskey. And people are beginning to discover what the old timers knew all along, that rye is just as viable as bourbon, Scotch, or Irish to an American market. So let's have a little taste of the whiskey that SLJ drinks when he's got fighting on his mind, which is quite often. Been a while since we had a good rye on the show. To you. Hey, that's all right. Now keep in mind, there are two kinds of rye whiskey. Canadian whiskey, which is sometimes referred to as rye for historical purposes, even if it doesn't contain the grain at all. But this is American rye. And to qualify for that designation, the mash bill has to be at least 51% rye. This guy, this Redemption, weighs in at 95% rye and 5% barley. So I got nothing bad to say about this. I mean, okay, is it the best rye that I've ever had? Definitely not. But it is a far cry from the worst that I've had. I'll say Redemption Rye is a pretty good representation of what rye whiskey is supposed to taste like. Well, maybe that's a little much. It is a little on the milder side. It doesn't have as much of that black pepper bite, but I'm not going to hold that against it. And for its price point, which is around $25, you could do worse if you're in the market for a taste of pre-Prohibition America. And speaking of the old days, Tex Grebner, who is an authority on all types of weapons, both notionally and practically, is also quite versed in rustic technologies, or what my great-granddad would have called hillbilly hardware. Tonight, Tex is going to take us through where we've not been before, into the realms of traps and snares as applied to the beast. You're going to love this one. Here's Tex and Tools of the Trade.
Welcome to Tools of the Trade here on Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. I am Tex Grebner, And we are blasting from the past on this episode, not only with Elder Millennial Degenerate Retrospective, with my own creature of the night, but also we're blasting back to the 80s with a Ghostbusters Wolfman toy that's going to be helping with this demonstration. The Predator from the 80s has some good utilization of primitive technology against a movie monster. And so we're going to be talking about snares and how you might use primitive snare technology against the beast. Now, with that being said, I sort of have this redneck deportment and uncanny ability for primitive skills. And so I kind of think of myself like Chance, Jean-Claude Van Damme's character from Hard Target from 1993, but because of my body type and my aesthetic, I look like Steven Seagal trying to cosplay as Jean-Claude Van Damme. I'm so much of a purist that I don't know if you can tell, but this is actually the inner cords of parachute cord that, because I'm so much of a purist, I actually hand twist braided a Flemish twist snare line. Nobody ever pays attention to how much force you need and mechanical advantage you need to be able to bend over a tree or lift a weight that is capable of taking the average man off of their feet and up into the air. So because I'm sorry, I'm not actually going to go bend over a 30-foot pine tree to do this. While I might be a purist and actually braided a Flemish snare, we're using a fly fishing rod tip here. Now everybody loves the cartoon physics of the snare, where the character steps into the loop or triggers the tripwire and gets flung into the air, spun around the tree, or slammed into the trees. But when you scale a snare up from something that's capable of lifting a rabbit or a fox off the ground to something that's capable of lifting 200 to 600 pounds, basically capable of hanging a black bear in the air, that kind of throws a monkey wrench into it. Now, while we do deal with the lunatic fringe here on Tools of the Trade, I try and ground things in reality. So the snare isn't going to do much against the beast, because one swipe of the claws and they're going to be out of it unless it's made of silver wire or something, at which point that's almost too unrealistic. However, if while they're being lifted into the air, you have created spike trees with silver nails or sharpened, cured aconite stems or some other form of punji stake above that they're going to be dragged through, that will create a spike pit in reverse, that might work. But also, the snare isn't the primary weapon. It's merely a delay technique to either give you enough time for a clean shot or to drag them into something much more deadly, again, like silver nails. Now in Predator, it's not actually a snare, but it is a really good usage of primitive style trapping technique to do booby traps. In this case, I'm using clothespins to make my trigger system along with a tripwire. You can also use that style of opposing forces in conjunction with a figure 4 or a secondary arch for a trail snare. But this was just the fastest and dirtiest demo that I could rig up. So this is a Victor Double long spring. This would have been near and dear to Sylvester and Michael. And the truth is, this isn't really feasible as a tool of the trade, because by the time that you had enough silver to make one of these, even if you could get it spring steel style silver, If you've got Vatican or Victorian ring money, why are you living in a cabin in the woods? Because these things, scaled up to bear trap size, would be so heavy you couldn't set an ambush except for around a home base. And even then, your anchor probably wouldn't hold. But because it's near and dear to Sylvester and Michael, I guess we're going to do a demo. So just like how the fishing rod was a spring, or our tree limb, we have springs, and we have a tension delay trigger, and then we have our pan. So I hope you guys have enjoyed watching this episode of Tools of the Trade here on Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter.
Don't you love primitive tech? He calls it out too, Predator. Predator versus Arnold, case in point. I guess one of the reasons that I enjoyed this segment so much is because I'm an old trapper from way back. I had a great uncle who taught me the ins and outs of running a trap line. Then I put that to use back in my 20s, both to trap fur and to run predator control for a couple of local ranchers where I grew up. Now, back then, we were mostly trapping coyote because they were the biggest problem to the livestock in that area, especially to the calves. And the coyotes on one particular ranch that I serviced were about as trap-wise an animal as you have ever seen, certainly as much as I had ever seen or heard of. They'd been trapped for so long, and by state government trappers, mind you, folks who knew what they were doing. So by the time I showed up on the scene, these coats could smell a trap at about 100 yards. And I kid you not, they would dig them up and take a crap right on them. So it left no room for imagination what they thought of it. So I had an idea to use snares, just like Tex demonstrated. Now, this is not to scale, of course, much like the working model that Tex just showed us. This one is made for rodents, rats, squirrels, muskrats. I don't know how well you can see it. It's a really thin piece of cable, and it's got a little locking slide on there, and a stop to keep it from coming out. A little spring at the base, and a loop to anchor it with. So I made them. Like I said, this is not the scale of what I used, but back then I made them about from 6 feet of aircraft cable. With a lock washer, a ferrule, and a stop. But instead of using the counterweight, like we saw from Tex that takes the prey off its feet, I would set these locking cable snares by wiring them to the top string of a barbed wire fence and then hanging them open like this, using the barbs on the bottom rung of the fence. And then so what would happen is, and I'd put these where I'd found snags of coyote fur going under the bottom rung of the fence. And so the bottom loop would be hanging open below the bottom string of fence, like so. And the coyote would come through because they use the same paths over and over. Eventually one would come through, stick his head in through, and it would catch right around on his neck or chest. And as he would pull through, so would the snare would come off its barbs and would go around his neck, and he was effectively caught. And this turned out to be pretty effective. The rancher, who was an older gentleman and kind of skeptical of the snares, turned out to be a big fan of them and told everybody who'd listen how I had managed to catch animals that professional men couldn't. Anyway, sorry for going on into that, but I do love a good trap, and Texas demonstrations always brings it home for us, and we appreciate it. Well, back in 2013, I did an interview with Jeff Rutherford on his Reading and Writing podcast, where he speaks with authors and writers about their books, their writing habits, favorite novels, and how they got started, and so forth and so on. I was Jeff's 120th episode back in 2013, and I was glad to be part of it. But I just happened to come across it the other day, and I thought I might share it all with you here. There's no video to the interview, but we have it on audio, and so have a listen.
Welcome to the 120th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with horror writer Brian Easton, author of the novel Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter. Stay tuned for the interview. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Brian Easton, author of Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter and Heart of Scars, the second book of Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, Jeff.
Sure. Well, first I wanted to see if you could read the first page or two of the prologue of Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter.
Sure, my pleasure. When I was 12, I couldn't wait to be a man, and I thought I'd be one when I turned 13. That meant everything to a boy who, more than anything, wanted to be like his papa. What I wanted was to make him proud of me because I'd had caused him so much grief. I thought if I did everything right, I could make it up to him. My father's name was Foster James, and he was French-Canadian. He met my mother, Abigail, in Nova Scotia, where they married and settled after World War II. Mother was half Cheyenne Indian. I was born in Halifax in 1950, and it was the nurses who named me Sylvester Logan. They said they couldn't stop my mother's bleeding. I don't think she ever got to hold me. We lived in an old house in Lethbridge, Alberta, near where Mama had grown up. Her parents were gone, and Papa's had died when he was young, so we only had each other. Papa had been a woodsman most of his life. He said it ran in his blood. From being with him, I learned to read the forest's secret language of sight and sound. The time we spent in the woods together was the finest I remember. We'd find tracks in the snow or mud, and he'd quiz me on which animal had made them. Or he'd point to a tree and say, "I wish I knew what kind of tree that is," which was my cue to provide the answer. He taught me to fish in the summer, to hunt in the autumn, and to trap in the winter. I always believed that Papa held me responsible for Mama's death. There were times he would look at me like I was a ghost, and when I would ask him what was wrong, he would force a sad smile and shake his head. But most of the time, he just stared through me, and I could almost read his mind. "I know you," he seemed to say. "You're the one who killed my wife." I always felt ashamed. I don't remember ever hearing Papa laugh, but he didn't cry either. Real men didn't do such things. He believed tears were a sign of a weak spirit, and there was no place in my father's life for weakness. When I would cry, he would be stern and tell me to let it turn to something else. I suppose it was his way of dealing with pain, a mental exercise that changed weak emotions into strong ones. It also turned tears into anger. Every year, Papa took me rabbit hunting with my black Labrador, Brutus. The autumn of my 9th birthday, the three of us had found an area where loggers had left piles of dried brush and dead limbs, just the sort of places rabbits like to hide. Brutus flushed 3 from a particular pile, and Papa sent the first one rolling. I trained the bead of my .410 shotgun on the second, but as I tightened against the trigger, Brutus bolted into my line of fire. He yelped and tumbled into a heap. I rushed to him and dropped to the ground. His blood leaked onto my trousers as I held him. His eyes looked so surprised before he wilted in my arms. I buried my face in his neck and sobbed, "I'm sorry, Brutus." Papa kneeled behind me and placed his hand on my shoulder. "Crying won't bring him back," he said. "Turn it to something else. Turn it to something else, boy. Tears don't help anyone." I tried to do what he said, like he taught me, but all I could think of was that I had killed my dog, just like I'd killed my mama. Papa's hand tightened as he pulled me away from the dog. I clung to him and I cried, but he just patted me on the back. Then he held me at arm's length. "Look at me, Sylvester," he demanded. "Real men don't cry. If you want to be a real man, then let it turn to something else. Turn it toward the rabbits. Do you understand?" For the next 2 years, whenever I hunted rabbits, I didn't do it for the sport or for food. It was a vendetta. I wanted them dead because they'd made me kill my dog, and there was a cold sense of retribution every time I pulled the trigger.
Great. Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about your autobiography of a werewolf hunter novels yet, how would you describe the novels?
Well, the novels are a departure from typical werewolf fare, I think, in the fact that they focus on a human being rather than the monsters themselves. We see a lot today with werewolves and vampires and very monster-centric television and books and movies, and these things are great. I love them. But my books take a road away from that by dealing with what I think is a true human emotion, the human condition, if you will, and it kind of explores what it would take to make a man who essentially wants to be a good and decent human being, and basically ruin that for him with hatred.
Gotcha. And do you remember how you first got the idea for Sylvester James, the werewolf hunter, in your novels?
Well, that's a question that doesn't have one answer. He is the child of several different inspirations, some as ridiculous as an episode of Laverne and Shirley in 1977, and others from a youthful fascination with comic book monster hunters like Marvel's Blade the Vampire Slayer. I noticed that there didn't seem to be too many werewolf hunters around. In fact, I didn't find any short of Lon Chaney, Claude Rains, and a silver-handled stick in the Wolfman. So I decided to kind of fill the gap with a comic book character when I was probably 10 years old, and he eventually became Sylvester Logan James.
Gotcha. So what is it about the werewolf monster that appeals or interests you as a writer? Or as you mentioned earlier, is it more about the hunter?
Well, it is about the hunter, but the hunter's not much without his prey, and the werewolf, even though he's not the central point of the book, he is obviously the catalyst by which all these things happen. Werewolves have been my favorite monster, if we want to put it that way, since I was a kid. I don't know. I think it came from something as simple as, whose monster can beat up whose monster. I used to, grew up as a big fan of the Universal classics, like a lot of kids did back then, and I liked the Creature from the Black Lagoon because he was so, completely powerful in the water, and I loved Frankenstein because he was unstoppable. But there was something about the werewolf, something about just that innate savagery of the beast that I thought could take out any of them. I thought maybe the only good fight might be between it and the creature, but only in the water. And that was probably my first turn on, I guess, towards the werewolf, and the fact that I thought it was just the baddest ass monster on the block, and I still pretty much think so. But as I got as I got older, and started investigating werewolf myths in both history and mythology, I began to find a lot of other aspects about it, occult aspects that really inspired me.
Sure. I'm curious if you've read a lot of other werewolf literature and if there are particular books that stand out for you that you may have read.
I have read quite a bit of factual, if we can use that term, treatment on the subject that is nonfiction. I haven't read just a lot of werewolf fiction. I've read maybe a handful of novels,
right?
But the ones that really stand out to me as for being important could be Montague Summers, The Werewolf. Montague Summers, as whatever people may think of him, was an encyclopedia of knowledge on the occult. and his representation of the werewolf and his kind of ideas about the werewolf as being, servants of the devil and these kinds of things are at the very heart of my concept of the beast, as I refer to it in the books. So those kinds of books, the ones written by occultists or by people who are giving it more of a socio-anthropological study, have done more to influence my opinions and my work on the subject than any fiction ever did.
Right. What was your background prior to having your first novel published? What was the path to publication like for you?
Well, I've been writing since I was 10 years old. I've said this before in other interviews. My mother gave me a typewriter when I was 10, presumably to get me out of her hair on a Saturday afternoon. And I started typing up stories about, superheroes and monsters and things like that. And I never stopped. As far as being a published author, the idea that could ever actually happen never really crossed my mind in any kind of serious way until I became engaged to my wife, who was my encouragement, to go ahead and self-publish. And the idea was, if I could self-publish and it was good enough, if it turned out to be good enough, then somebody would take notice of that and, offer me a contract. And then I could be, get out of that, the stigma of the self-publication thing. And if it wasn't good enough, well, then it wasn't good enough. I was always willing to let my work stand or fall on its own merit, and it wasn't going to be brokenhearted one way or another. The big thing, I think, for people who want to be published or who are aspiring writers, is that you have to do it because you love it and for no other reason. Because if you have some kind of ulterior motive, or in the back of your mind you think you're going to make it big someday, that's probably not going to happen. So you need to do it because you do it whether you made a nickel off of it or not. That's the way I always approached it. And it just happened to turn out that my gambit of getting it the book self-published and then someone taking notice paid off for me. So I was very lucky in that regard.
And how did that work? I know that you're published now by Prohibition Press, but so you self-published and then they discovered the novel? Is that how it worked?
Right. Yeah, I self-published through a company called iUniverse in 2003. That was when Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter was then known as When the Autumn Moon is Bright, and then it was subtitled Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter.
Right.
I self-published that one, and I entered it in the Independent Publisher Awards contest, and it won. It placed what was the equivalent of a silver medal in that contest, which gave me great encouragement for something like that, to have the work validated by someone other than people who basically have to like it because they're your friends and family.
Right.
And so that's what I did. And I also self-published Heart of Scars as a sequel. And then Jacob from Prohibition Press, I'm not sure exactly how he found the novels, but I got an email from him one day saying, "Hey, this is my name. This is the company that I've got, and we're interested in picking you up." And I've been skeptical about these kinds of things because, there's always somebody wanting to make a buck off your back. But I did the due diligence on that, and yeah, it's a great. Prohibition Press is a great outfit. I was very lucky to be picked up by them.
That's great. So, the book that you self-published, Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter, was that the first novel that you had written, or were there other, quote unquote, kind of practice novels to learn the craft?
Yeah, I've got. Like I said, I never stopped writing, and I never threw anything away either. So what I've got now, somewhere in the annals of my library here, I've got 6 thick 3-ring binders full of manuscripts. They're not actually manuscripts; they're done on a typewriter, which is how I used to write up until around 2000, when I finally was brought into the computer age, kicking and screaming. But I have 6 other manuscripts a lot of them completely unrelated to the material that's out there now. Uh, and the idea was that when I rewrote Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter, was to take all that material and compile it into one book, and it didn't work out that way at all. And so now I have 6, completely unrelated binders full of supplemental material, which sometimes follows and sometimes doesn't follow the chronology of the books. But yeah, that was a lot of practice or good test runs for me there, because like I said, it was all done on computer. And so I remember, making a mistake and running out of correction ribbon and having to run to Walmart, at 2 a.m. and pick up some correction ribbon, get back to the house so I could, go to sleep that night knowing that I had done my best for the day.
Right. And what kept you going doing that?
It's a vision for the character. That's all I know how to say it as. I have had a vision in my mind of Sylvester Logan James since probably 1986. I can about pinpoint it to then. I mean, he existed before that in various forms, but I really kind of got a feel for him around 86, and I can't shake it. I've tried to write even other things, and I can't do any more than just a couple of short stories at a time before I'm drawn back into the world of Sylvester. And I don't think I'm going to be able to write anything else until I'm done with his story. And I don't really know how to explain it other than it's just something that I have a real feel for in my heart. I know the guy. And if he was a real human being, I'd be scared shitless of him. But I feel like I know the guy because he's just been with me for so long.
Sure. And are you working on a third novel now? And do you have novels in your mind beyond that?
I am working on the third novel now. Originally, I had kind of planned this to be a trilogy, and that's kind of still where I'm at with it. I've been working on this last one for a couple of years now. The progress has been slowed considerably due to the birth of my son a couple years ago, because I work slow anyway, and that didn't help matters. But yeah, we're coming along real good on that. I'm probably 2/3 of the way through. I would estimate with the lineage, which is what the third one is tentatively called. That should, in effect, wrap up the saga of Sylvester James. And then beyond that, I do have one thing I want to do before I take up anything else. I want to write a prequel, which should be pretty lengthy, I'm thinking, detailing the life of Sylvester's mentor in the books, Michael Winterfox, who's the old Cheyenne mystic that takes him in and teaches him some of the old skills of his almost extinct order of Cheyenne warriors.
Right. And given your success to date, what advice do you have for aspiring writers who may be listening who would like to get their own novels or short stories published one day?
Well, I think that the best advice that I could give, I've already given, and that is, if you love what you do, if you love to write, if you feel like you would do it, no matter if you were doing it for free or not, then you're on the right track. And find something that you know about, but don't be afraid to write what you don't know about, because you need to learn as well. A lot of people come from the place, like every English teacher or literature teacher tells their kids, write what you know. Well, that's true, to start off with, but you also have to be willing to expand your horizons and learn new things, because it's the only way you're going to grow as a writer. If you just write what you know, any one of us can probably fill a suitcase with what we know, and then what? You have to learn new things and constantly challenge yourself with detail, vocabulary, and just the poetry of writing. There's so many things I read nowadays that have no heart to it. It's either very flowered up with this $50 words that nobody uses in real life, and I use my share of those. I'm not I'm not immune to this either. Or the the dialogue is so stunted that a third grader could have written it. Try to find a middle ground and make your voice, practice getting your voice heard until you're happy with it, because that's pretty much the only way. It's the only standard that you have. If I can read a page and I'm happy with it, then I have to let it go. I can't worry about, well, is this going to offend this part of the population, or is somebody going to think that I'm too weak on this subject? You have to do what you do and let it go. And I think that's true no matter what you do. If you're a writer, painter, sculptor, if you do any kind of a creative thing at all, I think that holds true.
Sure. Do you have any specific kind of writing process or rituals that you go through?
I do, and I think everybody does, but mine are pretty simple compared to some of the ones that I've heard about. I go through a period of, again, I work slowly, admittedly, but I'll go through a period of a year to 3 years sometimes doing nothing but accumulating ideas. And I'll write ideas down for sometimes, like I said, 1 to 3 years, and words or phrases or concepts that I appeal to me or catch my eye. And I'll let all that kind of get mossy in my head, and I keep adding to it. It's kind of like throwing compost in a pile, you get that all, get it real, work it all up and get it real fertile. And then I know when the time comes. It's in a weird way, it's kind of like, I guess it's kind of like giving birth, because you get all this stuff going and you're gestating it in your mind, and it's germinating, and finally there comes a time where you just feel like, yes, now is the time. It's about to spill out of me, and then I'll sit down and I'll start writing. And from there, it's anybody's guess. I've tried to do outlines, and that helps me, to some extent. But what I found is that my outlines go right out the window in about chapter 2. And the stories pretty much tend to take on a life of their own. The characters create their own dialogue. Not all the time. I mean, I get writer's block like everybody else, and I get stumped for a month or two and just dread getting back to the keyboard again because I don't know what to do. But, that's something you have to face as a writer. You work it out, you keep going. And that's kind of my process.
That's interesting. I think everybody has their own unique way of approaching the writing process. So it's good to hear how you do it. What writers or books, either fiction or nonfiction, have you read in the past year or two that made an impression on you and that you might recommend?
Well, I have to say, and I have to, I know I say this quite a bit, I think, but Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy is hands down the chief of books, not of fictional novels that I've read in the last 10 years, maybe my whole life. If you're not familiar with it, it's Cormac McCarthy, of course, author of The Road, No Country for Old Men. Blood Meridian is basically and widely considered his masterpiece. It's a Western, it's a Western horror. I consider it, because it's so graphically violent and yet poetic at the same time. And I've read this book probably, without exaggeration, I can say that I've read or listened to this book about 20 times in the last 6 years or so. And I have no plans of not doing, of stopping that, because I just can't get enough of it.
What is it about it that resonates with you, or that
Well, one of the things that I really relate to about it is that it's kind of it's very close to the kind of things that I write about, and that is a theme of justification or redemption through violence. The characters in the story, although it's a Western, are basically trying to find their way in the world and weave order out of chaos through nothing else than, wanton cruelty. And they're trying to force their way through it, the violence. And, in the books, in my books, Sylvester James is the same way. He basically has no recourse at a certain point but to try to find some kind of reason for his life through bloodshed. and there's no turning back to it. So the bloodshed just has to keep coming, and it gets deeper and deeper. The poetry of Blood Meridian is the other thing. How a book can be so wildly violent and yet so beautifully poetic at the same time is a paradox. It's one for the books. Cormac McCarthy, especially in this one, has just got a way of presenting a severed head on a china platter. It's just an elegantly brutal masterpiece, and it's the language, it's the settings, and I'm a fan of the old West from way back. I grew up watching spaghetti westerns and creature feature, and so the Western horror connection is very deep, runs very deep in my blood, and Cormac McCarthy brings that together so well in Blood Meridian. And I know a lot of people have commented that about the book that they just couldn't finish it because it was so gruesome, but they're obviously not horror fans. So,
Gotcha. So where can people find you online?
I have a website that I use called werewolfhunter.com, and information on my books are there, as well as links to my Facebook page, which is where I interact with my readers on a pretty regular basis. I'll post snippets from the new books that I'm working on, information about interviews that I've done. In fact, whenever this comes out, I'll have a link to it there. But yeah, werewolfhunter.com is the best place to start, and you can find my books through links there on Amazon, and like I said, also my Facebook page.
Sure. Well, great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Brian Easton, author of Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter and Heart of Scars, the second book in the Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter. Both books, as he just said, are available online and in bookstores. Brian, thanks for doing this podcast.
It's my pleasure, Jeff. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
You know how you just sometimes cringe at the sound of your own voice and something you said? Yeah. Anyway, Jeff is still going strong with his author interviews, and I thank him for having me on his podcast back then. You can find a link to Jeff's Reading and Writing podcast in the description below, along with all the others. And incidentally, that interview, as well as others I've done, can be found on our website, werewolfhunter.com. You can also send me an email if you want to, brian@werewolfhunter.com. Thanks for coming by the Werewolf Bar tonight, and be sure to like and subscribe on your way out. Hopefully, Doc will be with us next month, and so we're looking forward to seeing you again in September. But until then, happy hunting, and mind the moon.